Motorola has these lines that represent demographics that they want to appeal to, with the Moto G series being a cheap alternative to the flagship at the time. They continued their weird naming schemes until now, where they just have the name and the year, this one being the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Yes, I know it's a mouthful, but it's 2022, which begs the question. Should you buy the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 in 2022? Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and yes, most of that intro was literally naming phones. So, let's just get started on the review. Now, just like the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, this is a cheaper device. It's a pretty expensive one if you buy it from Motorola with 256 gigabytes, but this is the 128 gigabyte version, and it's about $250 at T-Mobile, while used versions start at $150 and go up. However, I was able to find one of these at $88. So with a budget price, we do get budget specs, starting with that decent Snapdragon 480 chip that is paired with 4 or 6 gigabytes of RAM with 128 or 256 gigabytes of expandable storage, respectively. I assume UFS 2.0 because the benchmark is a little bit slower than 2.1. The one I have is the 4/128 gigabyte version, but there is an option for an extra gigabyte of virtual RAM, which is used by your storage, so I guess it's really the 5/127 gigabyte version. Not sure how that extra RAM works because most tasks run pretty well with most apps running in the background with ease. Of course, the processor isn't anything special, with most apps dropping frames and load times forcing you to be patient. While gaming isn't the best, you can get away with playing some games. But that's the idea behind this phone. Slower performance like the Nord N10, but it's all to save your battery. This is a 5000 mAh battery that allows for 10 watts of charging, but I swear it charges a little bit faster. This also gives you spectacular battery life, possibly thanks to that less demanding processor or 60Hz display, but I was still surprised to end my days with over 70%, even with decent usage. And heavy usage looks like this. But going back to the display, it is a 6.8-inch IPS LCD that is 1080p and looks fairly decent even with that 387 pixels per inch. The only thing that would make it better is if it was an OLED. I did experience an issue where the screen wasn't really registering gestures properly, often clicking things and trying to go back, or even worse, double tapping on stuff like on Instagram rather than going back. So the 3-button toggle might be the better option for this phone. It's a fairly bright display at around 500 nits, but it doesn't look over brightened like the Nord N10 did. Personally, I think that the screen is pretty decent because it has to be, and it's pretty cheap to fix. We do get some nice features like the ambient display that pops up when the phone gets moved, allowing for you to almost have an always-on display, but just one that saves battery life. The thing I like about it is that it shows notifications in an awesome way, but for some reason the lock screen doesn't really show anything. I tried changing settings so then it would show up on the lock screen, but I can never figure it out. When looking on the outside of the device, you realize that everything is pretty much plastic, besides the screen and the camera lens. This is a cheap build for sure, but it does come with some benefits, as well as some heft. This phone comes in at 217 grams, which is heavy for a non-metal outer build, but we do get a headset jack and a memory card slot. Back to the bottom, we get the only loudspeaker on this phone, as well as USB-C 2.0 port, which allows for 10 watts of charging and slow data transfer speeds. But on the right, we get the stylus, something I don't really care for, but it allows for literal note-taking and drawing, which means nothing to me. But with LG out of the game, this is one, if not the cheapest stylus phone that you can buy. And it comes with 5G. As for the back, we get a fairly nice plastic back, as well as the camera area and fingerprint scanner built into that Motorola logo. And besides the logo, we get no other branding, making this a smooth and clean looking, come on. The camera spec writing is so tacky. As expected, the cameras are acceptable. It's a cheap device with big camera numbers, some useless ones, and some weird restrictions. To start, we get a 5 megapixel macro lens and a 2 megapixel depth sensor, which sound just as useless as they really are. Honestly feels like the portrait shots would look better with just a standard lens and software, and the macro never looks as good as the standard lens zoomed in. We get an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, which is a staple for budget phones nowadays. At least that's what it seems like. And the quality is passable, it's not anything amazing. Then we have the main sensor, which is a 48 megapixel sensor that does not have optical image stabilization and has some stabilization for video that's electric, but it's kind of useless. Yes, this 8K capable sized camera is not even capable of 4K video, and it has 5G and 2021 literally in its name. For a budget phone, it could pass, but not in a 5G phone. We do get 1080p 30 and 60 frames per second video, but for me, it's not that usable. Here's some photos and videos that I took, so you can be the judge. Enjoy. The front camera is a 16 megapixel sensor, but just like the rear, passable and not that good. Video is 1080p at 30 frames per second and still not that good. Overall, confusing why I made this into its own section, but it has 5 cameras, so why not? Okay, so this phone looks nice, surprisingly feels nice, and has pretty good battery life, but is that it? Is that the only reason to buy this phone? No, that's not the only things, and honestly, I wouldn't buy this, but that's just because of the type of phones that I use all the time. Instead, this is for people that can't really afford too much of a phone or don't want to spend that much on a phone. Or worse, those that are forced to buy a phone because their carrier said that they have to. But in all of those groups, this is a fairly good phone. It has a large screen that you can draw on with a good battery life, which is surprisingly hard to find nowadays. We pair that with an SD card slot, fingerprint reader, face unlock, and a company like Motorola to back it up, and you get a reasonable phone for a reasonable person that doesn't want the latest and greatest, but wants a phone that does more than just the basics. At the end of the day, a budget phone is a budget phone for a reason. And this phone hits that budget price, assuming, again, that you don't buy it from Motorola direct. Looking at T-Mobile's lineup, this would probably be the only cheapest phone that I would want to buy because I know Motorola isn't going to abandon this phone for no reason. But seeing this phone go past Android 12 doesn't really seem that likely since we're stuck on Android 11 right now. And that's my review of the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021, the only riding phone now that LG is gone. But what do you think? Was I too hard on this budget phone? Let me know in the comment section or socials listed above, and as always, thanks for watching.